Chapter 23, The Calm Before the Storm. Somewhere in the Caribbean Sea. Despite the vast effects Second Impact had on the climate and topography of the world, there were still places that had stayed virtually the same. One of these places included the Caribbean Isles. Though the initial tsunamis of the cataclysm had effectively wiped them clean of human habitation, they were soon resettled and once more became popular tourist attractions. As such, the beaches were relatively crowded, filled with tourists and natives enjoying the perennial summer weather and perfect waters. One of these beachgoers, a young boy no older than 6, was sitting right before the waves and clumsily making a sandcastle. So engrossed in this particular activity was he, that he failed to notice the trio of large bulges in the water approaching the land until he was grabbed by his mother and hurriedly pulled away. Looking back, he saw his sandcastle washed away by the waves as some huge thing emerged from the water. The thing in question, a particularly hungry kamacurid, stared down at the fleeing crowds with its yellow compound eyes. It had been too long since it had last fed, a sentiment shared by its two siblings. It took a few more tentative steps out of the water, clicking its mandibles together with anticipation as it raised one of its limbs to snatch up a meal. Before the limb fell, however, it felt searing pain as something clamped down on one of its legs with appalling force. The titanic mantis found itself being hoisted into the air by its leg and tossed back to sea, but not before the leg in question was wrenched free of its socket. The kamacurid flailed about as it righted itself, staining the waves yellow with ichor. Looking up, it managed to see the last few moments of a sibling's life as some sleek gray creature viciously stomped its head into pulp. The other sibling lunged, intending to attack the creature from behind, only to be casually sent flying back by a flick of the creature's tail. It hit the ground hard, shattering any bits of its exoskeleton that had survived the initial attack. The kamacurid twitched sporadically, then went limp. The creature now turned its attention on the lone survivor. The injured kamacurid tried to move back, completely dominated by the instinct of self-preservation. Blue flashes of light danced across the creature's dorsal spines, making their way up its back as it opened its toothy jaws. The last thing the giant mantis ever saw was a jet of blue flame blasting towards it from the creature's maw. =/==== Nerve HQ. Gordon switched off the video feed. So, Junior's in the Caribbean. It would appear so, Miki replied sullenly. Gordon spared the psychic a sympathetic glance. You haven't been taking your serums, have you? Miki shook her head. Not since what happened. I understand how much he meant to you, Gordon said, rising from his desk and looking out the window. Godzilla's skeleton was still in the center of the galley-front, the crystalline structure reflecting the sunlight in a way that flooded the chamber in a dazzling display. Hell, I can't sincerely expect you to move on yet, it's only been 2 weeks. But I need you to take the serum again. Junior's out there, and we can't track him. What if he gets hurt? What if, in his grief, he lashes out at people? We can't let that happen when we have the opportunity to stop it. Miki sighed, looking down at her hands and twiddling her thumbs. I'll take a prescribed dose tomorrow. Rising, she smiled weakly at Gordon. I'll be heading on my way, sir. Not just yet, Gordon interjected. They're finally bringing his skeleton back home today. I want you to accompany me and the others to see him off. Miki sniffed quietly. I guess it'd be for the best. Gordon sighed. So do I. =/=/===. The galley-front. You know, I never appreciated just how big he really was until now, Shinji thought as he looked up at Godzilla's skeleton. Even in death the kaiju king was a dominating presence, exceeded in height by only the pyramid that was HQ. I never thought I'd see the day where this would happen, Zone Fighter replied. The mightiest one of us all, struck down first. Please stop talking, you made me realize just how ominous that is, Shinji thought with a shiver. A small fleet of EDF aircraft were hovering over the Leviathan's remains, pulling the colossal bones up with thick tethers. Slowly but surely, they managed to lift his skeleton into the air, slowly dragging it towards the large wormhole nearby. Soon, the skeleton had disappeared. "What are they going to do with it?" Misato asked aloud. "We don't know yet," was Gordon's reply. "Some want it to be put on display in a museum, while others want it made into a statue to commemorate him." "I think we should bury it in his lagoon," Miki said. "It was where he felt most at home. Besides, something tells me he wouldn't want us to mess around too much with his bones." The group fell quiet after that, then began to disperse. Miki was the last to go. The psychic stared at where Godzilla's skeleton had been for some time, as silent as the grave. With a sniffle she turned away, then paused briefly, having sensed something for the most infinitesimal of time periods. Shaking her head, she walked away. =//==== Infant Island, G Earth. Ray stood on the shore, the waves gently lapping against her toes as her blue hair danced in the breeze. Her red eyes were focused on nothing in particular, their gaze leveled at the horizon. She was dressed in typical islander attire, having long since discarded her school uniform. On either side of her were the Shobaijin. The twin fairies were also staring out towards the horizon, hovering as to be at eye level with her. For some time, all of them were quiet. The Shobaijin were the first to break the silence. "You remember," they said. Ray nodded nearly imperceptibly. "Vaguely," she said softly. "Do you remember that you are Lilith?" The Shobaijin continued. "We are who others perceive us to be," Ray replied. "Lilith was a name given to me on a world that was long dead when the earth was young. I am Ray Ayanami." The Shobaijin nodded in understanding. "Do you remember why you went to the other earth?" "There was an impending danger," Ray replied softly, closing her eyes as she worked to recall the incomplete memories. "I do not know what, but I do know that we had consigned ourselves to the extinction of our bodies. We used the pinnacle of our power to forge the moons and sent them throughout the stars. I was one of 7 seeds sent out in the moons." "Were they all like you?" the Shobaijin asked. Ray shook her head slightly. "We were like the children that claim this world, but not quite. Each of us was complete unto ourselves. We had no need, only want. Perfect?" There was a brief pause before she continued. "To carry the souls of our people across the void was the most monumental task we had ever undertaken. Such a task needed a special form. One powerful enough to ensure the safety of the souls we carried." "Was that the same for Adam?" the Shobaijin pressed on. "Of a sort," came Ray's reply. "He was made to give the fruit of life to his children. They too would be complete unto themselves, but they would lack self-awareness and cognizance. I was given the fruit of knowledge. My children would have what they lacked, and vice versa. Our children could not inhabit the same planet, for fear of what would happen." "Why must the children only have one fruit?" the Shobaijin inquired. "For that is what they are, children. We were nearly extinguished long before we achieved the pinnacle of our civilization. They would have to be ready before they could ever have such power." Ray's eyes fell upon a large rock that blocked the worst of the waves. "I am, in a way, their mother. I want what all true mothers want, for their children to be happy, to prosper." She focused her will on the rock, lifting it into the air with the light of her soul. With some mental effort, it shattered into thousands of pieces. "To be safe." The Shobaijin looked at her now, awe clear on their faces. "What will you do now?" "I will wait and watch for now. 2 of Adam's children have yet to come, and your noble guardian has fallen. The others must fight to protect the rest of me. It is only then that I will be able to truly become whole." With that, she fell silent and continued to watch the horizon. =//=== Nerve HQ, a few days later. Ozaki barged into Gordon's office, making a beeline to the EDF captain's desk with a before-unseen urgency. Godzilla's bones have been stolen. The human, Zillion hybrid growled. Gordon snapped his head up from the report he was reading. What do you mean, stolen? Jet just received a report from home, came Ozaki's quick reply. Something attacked the envoy carrying his bones and carted off with them. Do we have a clue as to who did it? Gordon inquired, rising from his chair. Whoever did it, it wasn't human, Ozaki replied. We recovered a black box from the site of the attack. According to the pilot, it was something big. Space Godzilla, Gordon said with a low tone of voice. There's no other kaiju that would have the motive or ability to do so. That brings up another thing I need to tell you, Ozaki said. Someone hacked into one of our old data depots somewhere in Okinawa. They stole a couple of files on Zillion mind control tech. And Silver Dragon. An icy chill formed in Gordon's gut. Someone's controlling Space Godzilla, he said with carefully measure behind the words. That's the only way to explain what's going on. That begs another question, Ozaki said. Who? =//===. Fuatsuki sighed as he entered the office. Being the EDF's mole into SEAL was not an easy task. Much of it was spent deflecting any suspicion that the EDF knew anything about them or their plans, something that he had to manage with some cues from the former commander. Today another meeting had been scheduled. He suspected they were going to ask how the project was progressing without the meddling influence of the creature they still insisted on calling LS-001. As always, he would nod his head, make some cryptic statements and vague affirmatives, then tell everything to Gordon. It was no use lying, he was unwilling to test how far that young Sagusa woman could go with her abilities. Then, with a chuckle, he realized that the young woman was only 7 years younger than him. Occasionally, especially when he was alone with his thoughts, he would realize just how weird the universe had gotten. Fuatsuki sat down, making himself comfortable. A few moments passed, then he checked his watch to make sure he was on schedule. They were always punctual, and the watch was showing the right time. Before he could ponder what this meant, the holographic displays activated. And he found himself looking at Shinji Ikari. The old man suddenly grew very clammy, and he swallowed nervously as he studied his former compatriot. The man was rather unkempt, his beard had grown rather scraggly and uncombed, and his clothes didn't look particularly fresh. His orange glasses were gone, instead replaced by a visor not unlike Kill's. "Hello, Fuatsuki," he said coldly. "How?" Fuatsuki began, only to find himself incapable of speaking any further. "It is a long story, and I feel no need to tell you," Gendo replied dismissively. "Let's just say I made some new alliances, then severed them when needed." "The old men?" Fuatsuki inquired. "They have been taken care of," the former commander replied. "I am in control of the scenario now. The cores of the final 2 angels have been located and destroyed." "Why are you even telling me this?" Fuatsuki asked. Gendo smirked slightly. "Because I know they have Rei on the other Earth. I decided to ask politely for her back before I did anything rash." A shudder ran down Fuatsuki's spine. "You have everything the old men had, and then some. I wouldn't be so surprised if you managed to get your hands on some of the monsters on the other Earth," he thought warily. "I know you're a mole," Gendo continued. "It doesn't matter, because I also know you want Yua back. You will tell them to give me Rei. They can free her." Fuatsuki blurted out. The smirk on Gendo's face disappeared. "Ah yes," he said with a slight growl. "The 2 fairies who sang a song and got old Asusa out of Unit 03. I've been keeping tabs on events going on in my absence. I know that their silly moth goddess refuses to let them free her." "They will free her," Fuatsuki pleaded. "Just give them time." "I will not my wife's fate be decided on the whims of some overgrown bug," Gendo spat, leaning in closer. If Rei Ayanami isn't given to me within the week, they will suffer the consequences. With that, the hologram faded. Fuatsuki rose from his chair, shaking. Turning about, he half walked, half stumbled to the soundproofed door and opened it. Gordon and Miki were waiting, just like always. "There's some bad news," he said weakly. Gordon let out a hollow chuckle. "Join the club. =//====. Planet X." Gendo walked the halls of the facility alone. It was impressive in size and complexity, he had to admit. The aliens had succeeded in making all of the operations in the base controlled completely by computers, thanks to impressive advancements in nanotechnology and sciences he had never even heard of before arriving here. Of course, that had led to their undoing. All it took was for him to familiarize himself with their systems, no easy task, he thought ruefully, and then it was a simple matter to flood the facility with poison gases. The place still reeked slightly, but otherwise it was a successful task. He stepped onto a service elevator, casually noting that there was still some blood on the handrails. A few seconds passed as he rose swiftly, then he hopped onto the catwalk and began his inspection of the monster cages. He passed the first few kaiju quickly, only giving them cursory glances to make sure they were still secured. He spent more time inspecting the mass production Evangelions, however. These weapons were instrumental to the scenario, and therefore needed to be at their highest levels of functionality. He still didn't know why the old men had decided on giving them such faces. The eyeless grins they gave him were most unnerving. The next kaiju that needed inspection was not exactly one. At least, not yet. Suspended in a massive LCL tube was a being once known as Kaworu Nagiza. It had been difficult to acquire him, but it was necessary. At the moment he was approximately 50 meters tall, clearly showing the signs of Ghidorah hybridization. Soon he would completely incorporate the remaining neck of the dragon-like creature into his body, then implant the Zillion mind control device. Gendo checked to make sure that it was still sedated, then moved on. Finally, he stood before the final creature. It was a massive thing, a looming monster of flesh and steel. Even when half completed and with bared innards it was an imposing sight. Dryly, he noted that it was remarkably similar to an Evangelion, even if the genetic donor was not. "I have to admit, this is quite an ironic fate for you," he said to the creature. Satisfied with the construction progress, he began to finalize his preparations.